Chapter 4. Africans created the most developed civilization in medieval Europe. Who are Moors, Berbers, and Saracens? In the previous chapter, we briefly mentioned that, according to the Oxford Dictionary, black people and in particular Negroes were called Moors. Romans called Northwest Africa, Mauritania, and the Africans, Moors. Now we will conduct a very deep review of this issue, so that once we understood what Moors were, we could appreciate the Moorish Empire that became the cultural center of Europe. Three terms were used to refer to Moors. 1. Moors. 2. Arabic texts often used the term Berber instead of Moor, which was the definition of ancient non-Arab nations of Northwest Africa. 3. And, finally, Christian sources often used a generalized term, Saracens, to refer to Muslims, including Moors. Each term will be reviewed accordingly. All scholars agree that the term Moor came from the Roman word Maori, which they used to call black Africans by 157. Roman playwright Plautus 252–184 BC supported the view that the word Moor was synonymous with the word Negro. To set Moors of the 6th century against another racial group of North Africa, Byzantine writer Procopius of Caesarea 507–565 wrote that race was not like black Moors. 158. Isidore 586–636, a Catholic scientist and Archbishop of Seville, wrote that the word Moors meant black. Even today, one can see a black Moor's head adorning the flags of Corsica and Sardinia, pointing to their previous ruler's ethnicity. In classical Russian literature and also translations of classical foreign literature into Russian made in the 19th and early 20th centuries, Negroes were often called Moors. The saying, "the Moor has done his job, the Moor should leave," from Schiller's play, Fiesco's Conspiracy at Genoa, also interprets the term Moor as the term Negro. Since there are similar proverbs relating to Negroes, and no such proverbs relating to Muslims. In Shakespeare's Othello, Black Othello is called a Moor, because many of the Moors, who could not be defeated by the European medieval forces, were Muslims. Paintings and literature depicted the tormentors of Christ as black. 174. Similarly, demons were also described as black-faced. Among other titles, in medieval folklore Satan was called the Black Knight, black-skinned, the Black Ethiopian, and the Big Negro. In a cantiga of the Spanish king Alfonso X the Wise, 3 Moors attacking the Chincoy castle are described as black as Satan. In another cantiga, another black man who robbed a church is identified as a Moor. 175. In a poem by Ferdinand Gonzalez, both demons and Moors are described by the word carbonientos, which means having charred faces. 176. Naturally, at the time, Moors represented the embodiment of evil for European Christians, so they were described in a negative context. For us, it's just important to make sure from different sides that Moors were black. During the Renaissance in Europe, researchers, writers and scientists began to apply the term Moor to all black people. In support of this, Richard Hakluyt (1552–1616), one of the most prolific writers of the Elizabethan era, a tireless collector of geographic data, wrote that Africans, who in the old days had been called Ethiopians, and Negritos, in his time were called Moors, Morans, or Negroes. 177. In Romanic languages, Spanish, French, and Italian, in the Middle Ages, the word Moor was translated as Maro, Moyer, and Moor. Derivatives of this word can still be found in these languages. In Spanish, for example, black currant is mora. This noun initially referred to a Moorish woman. In Italian, mora also refers to a Negro, a Moorish woman, and black currant, and moraiola, means black olives. A Spanish word for brunette is merino. A French word, morico, means dark-skinned, and morlin, means black grapes. And in the final study of the term Moor, let's take a moment and plunge into the world of knights. Everyone has heard about King Arthur, a legendary leader of Britons of 5th to 6th century who defeated Saxon invaders, and his Knights of the Round Table. But few people know of a Black Knight of the Round Table. Sir Morian was a black Christian Moor, the son of Aglovale, one of the knights of King Arthur's Round Table. In the romance Morian, which is part of the medieval Dutch version of Lancelot and is located at the Royal Library in Brussels, it is said that Knight Aglovale fell in love with a Moorish princess and had a son, Morian. Subsequently, Aglovale was forced to leave the land of Moors. The novel, originally called The Moor, says that the whole body of Morian, except the teeth, was black. 178 In a personal fight with Lancelot they fought for so long that night Gawain stopped them to save the lives of both excellent warriors. Morian saved the life of Sir Gawain, third in nobility out of all the knights of the Round Table, on a battlefield. When he told Lancelot and Gawain that he was looking for his father, they promised to help find him, and then they performed heroic deeds together, demonstrating their talents. At the end of the story, Morian found his father, and they returned to the land of Moors, where Aglovale married Morian's mother and became a local king. English Egyptologist Gerald Massey mentions Morian as the Stone Age builder and ascribes him to a black race of Cushitic builders. 42. The next term we're going to examine is Berber. Thus, in Arabic literature the word Moor was practically non-existent, and in return, virtually all inhabitants of the Maghreb, a name given by medieval Arab geographers and historians to African countries located west of Egypt, were called Berbers. It is believed that the word Berber came from the Latin Barbari, which is equivalent to barbarians, a name Romans used to call nations who spoke neither Latin nor Greek. Berbers emerged as a result of mixing of Europeoids, who had come to the Maghreb at the end of the 2nd millennium BC, with more ancient Africanoid inhabitants of North Africa. According to Roman documents, amongst Berbers in North Africa, there were black Gaetuli and black Asphodeloids. 180. Sir Harold Alfred McMichael (1882–1969), a Knight of St. Michael and St. George Orders and a Distinguished Service Order, mentioned black Africanoid Tubu and Tuareg peoples that resembled ancient black people of the Sahara, who were originally Lambda Berbers. 181. Arab geographer Ibn Hawqal 10th century, believed that Tuareg, the people of the Berber group, were originally from Sudan and from the mother's side were descendants of black-skinned Ham, the son of Noah. 182 Scholar and historian Wahb ibn Munabi wrote that Berbers belonged to black Hamitic races. 183. Arab writer, theologian, pioneer of Arab literary criticism Al-Jahiz (776–869) listed Sudanese, Ethiopians, Fazanians, Berbers, Copts, Nubians, the Zaghawa and Moors as black peoples. 18. Muslim scientist Sanhaji wrote that they were black, although there were also some white among them. 185. And finally, the third term we need to address is Saracens. The majority of scholars are of the opinion that this word has Afro-Asian origin. The general belief is that Saracens were originally nomadic tribes of the Arabian and the Syrian deserts, formerly known for attacking Roman borders. 176. Historian Jerome 4th century identified Hagarenes, Ishmaelites, descendants of Abraham and Egyptian woman Hagar, with Saracens. He thought that they had decided to change their name to Saracens as they had claimed they were tied with Sarah, the wife of Abraham. 186 German theologian Rabanus Maurus, 776–856. The author of one of the first medieval encyclopedia entitled On the Natures of Things, wrote about similar observations. In his comments to Genesis, he tied Moors by type to the house of Ishmael. It is believed that Ishmael, the son of Abraham and Egyptian Hagar, the historical descendant of the Prophet Muhammad, was the builder of Kaaba, a Muslim shrine in Mecca. 43 Ishmael became the father of Arabs, one of the Semitic branches, from the name of Shem, the son of Noah. 188. The medieval kingdom of Mesopotamia was also called Khurasan, and the Byzantine Greeks were known as Sarachinos. According to French writer and historian Jean-Paul Kleibert, Kara, which means black, linguistically evolved into Sarakinos, and Saracen. 189. Saracens are described in detail in The Song of Roland, mid-12th century, one of the most famous and significant heroic poems of the Old French epics. Sir Roland, the prefect of Britain and a warrior in Emperor Charles's army, describes one of the leaders of Saracens as black as molten resin. He calls this 50,000 army Ethiopians, because black, wide-nosed Saracens with flat ears came from there. Roland later describes Saracens blacker than ink, with no white places, except for teeth. Knight Ferragus is described as a black giant Saracen. For the first time, he appears in the Chronicle of Pseudo-Turpin, where he fights Roland. In a novel, Roland and Ferragus, he is described as a Saracen, black as resin. Another character is Alagalfar, an Ethiopian giant, whose skin was black and rough. It is written that he was a king of great power, who had no equals in Europe, so strong and high. 191. There is also a legendary battle of William of Gellone and Iser, a black Saracen giant. Thus, the image of black Saracens in medieval literature reflects a realistic identification of tall Africans in Saracen armies. 192. So, we have discovered that the terms Moors, Berbers, and Saracens define black people. And when studying the Mauritanian in Spain, this will be our basis for linking their achievements with black peoples. Before we directly study the Moorish Empire, founded by Africans and Arabs, predominantly Muslims, it is important to revise the history of Arabs and Islam. A phenomenal role of Africans in the history of Arab world and Islam. The Arabian Peninsula, Arabia, in ancient times was inhabited by black people. At the same time, the tribes of Arabia are considered to be ancestors of Arabs. Once in a dominant position on the entire peninsula, the presence of Africans in ancient Arabia is most easily traced in Sabaean people. They were the first Arabians who represented a sufficient civilization. The southwest of the peninsula was the site of their original location. Today it is the territory of Yemen. In antiquity, the high civilization was developed thanks to fertile soil production of olibanum and myrrh, close proximity to the sea, and, therefore, existence of important trade routes. Remnants of the walls show the strength of Sabaean cities. And a strong dam for large tanks at the top of the city, traces of which have been preserved till today, shows high culture of the country. Sabaeans carried out extensive trade in gold, precious stones, etc. with Syria, Egypt, India, and Ethiopia. In the 10th century, the Sabaean kingdom became famous for their queen. This woman had all the qualities of an exceptional monarch and, according to the existing data, ruled all the vast territories of Africa and Arabia. In the Quran she is known as Bilqis, in the Ethiopian legends, in a book the Kebra Nagast, as Makeda, and in the Bible, as the Queen of Sheba. These three sources provide a clear picture of a highly developed state, characterized by a strongly marked high status of women. Bilqis, Makeda is not the only example. In Arabian history, we meet prominent women several times. Perhaps their deeds and legacy allowed them to remain in the annals of history without mentioning their husbands or other male relatives. Apparently, the Sabaean kingdom was a matriarchal society and culture. 193. This argument in favor of African roots of civilizations with pronounced matriarchal character was discussed above. As stated in the first chapter of this book, writers like Homer and Herodotus referred to inhabitants of Arabia as Ethiopians. 18. According to anthropologist C.A. Diop, Arabia was the territory of Kushites, the oldest African civilization, who developed civilization in the south of the Arabian Peninsula, where later on nomadic white people arrived from the north and the east. In this regard, he relied very much on the study of French archaeologist François Lenormand (1837–1883). About southern Arabians, Lenormand wrote that the powerful Arabian Empire, particularly in Yemen, was founded by Ethiopians. It is assumed that the practice of circumcision, established in Yemen in antiquity, and other customs practiced to this day are by origin Cushitic customs. In addition, he recalls ancient Arabian wise man Luqman, whose name is probably also of Cushitic origin. 194. Luqman is considered an architect of the Marib Dam. Later in the Middle Ages, Luqman was identified with Aesop, considered to be the author of fables and described as an ugly black slave. Aesop himself, an ancient Greek poet-fabulist, was identified as a black Ethiopian. He probably included a number of Luqman's fables into his work 195. The legend says that Luqman was either Ethiopian or Sudanese, charcoal black with curly hair. The name of Luqman is used in 31 surahs of the Quran. In them he is called a wise man who comprehended existence of the only God. In Islam, his glory is comparable to the wisdom of Solomon in the Judeo-Christian world. As historian Joel Rogers writes, there is still an expression, teaching Luqman wisdom, which is similar to an English expression, carrying coal to Newcastle. It means to provide something when there's already enough of it. Some legends even call him either a son, or a grandson of biblical Jobs, in Islam, Prophet Ayyub's sister. Another outstanding black Arab was Antara ibn Shaddad, an Arab poet and soldier of the pre-Islamic era, whose poem is part of the Mulaka poetic collection, which, according to the legend, hung in the Muslim shrine Kaaba. He was a son of an Ethiopian princess. He wrote this quatrain himself. I am black like musk and my body is black. My blackness couldn't be reduced with acid. But my spirit is far from any black deed. Far, as clouds of heavens are from earth. Antara's poems were highly valued by Arabs for their fighting spirit. A novel, Deeds of Antara, Surat Antar, attributed to the 8th century philologist Al-Asma'i, is dedicated to him. It became a classic on equal terms with the Persian Shahnameh, German, The Song of the Nibelungs, and English novels about King Arthur. In 1968, the principal editorial of Eastern Literature of Naka, publishing house of the USSR, published a shortened Russian translation of the novel entitled Life and Labors of Antara in prose, including original illustrations from the Cairo editions of the novel, which were an example of traditional Arab popular print type of fine arts. Scholar A. Stafford wrote of Antara that his literary fame exceeded the glory of A. Pushkin and A. Dumas, who also had black blood in them. He also marks him as the father of Arab chivalry 196. As a result of research conducted in Arabia, American anthropologist John Dennison Baldwin, a member of the American Oriental Society, concluded that at the end of the 20th century it had been populated by two different races. The first was descendants of the Cushitic or Ethiopian race, inhabiting mainly southern, eastern and central parts, but formerly ruling the entire peninsula. The second race was Semitic Arabs, the race of the Prophet Muhammad, found mainly in Hejaz, western Arabia, and in the north. In a number of regions, these races were more or less mixed. Since Muhammad times, Arabic language of Semites replaced ancient Cushitic Ethiopian language. Arab ethnologists always noted the obvious difference between the two races. In its turn, pure Arab blood belongs to the Cushitic group, and the remnants of their ancient civilization are found literally in every region of Arabia. 203. Dr. Bertram Thomas, 1892–1950, an English civil servant and the Prime Minister of the Sultanate of Muscat in Oman, the first representative of the Western world to cross the Rub al-Khali Desert, provided a number of evidence of a similar point of view. He noted that thousands of graffiti were found in southwest Arabia, made in hieroglyphic writing similar to Ethiopian, and unrelated to Arabic hieroglyphs, that would appear thousands of years after Ethiopian. Languages of Ethiopia and local southern kingdoms are related. Finally, he concluded that the two peoples were probably related by blood. Commenting on the studies of the Scottish anthropologist Sir Arthur Keith, 1866–1955, who studied remnants of Arab skeletons, Dr. Thomas states that the original inhabitants of Arabia did not look like modern Arabs, but were much darker. These Arabians were descendants of the Proto-Negroid branch of humankind. 204. Let us now look at the role of Africans in formation and development of Islam. It has already been pointed out that the Prophet Muhammad was a descendant of Ishmael, who in turn was a son of Egyptian woman Hajar. According to many historians, theologian Al-Jahiz among them, it is confirmed that he was partly of African origin. Al-Jahiz himself writes that Abd al-Muttalib ibn Hashim, the real name of Shayba ibn Hashim, the Lord of Mecca, became the father of 10 magnificent masters, black as the night 184. One of them was Abbas, father of Abdullah ibn Abbas, the founder of the Abbasid dynasty. The other was Abu Talib, father of a righteous Caliph Ali ibn Abu Talib, the founder of the Alid dynasty. And, finally, Abdullah, father of the Prophet Muhammad. By the beginning of the 7th century, the seeds of Islam matured, and Africa became an instrument for its spread. According to the legend, the first Muslim killed in a battle was a black-skinned Mishah, during the Battle of Badr. Another great black Muslim was Bilal ibn Rabah, whose father was from Ethiopia. Bilal is one of the best-known companions of the Prophet Muhammad and the first muezzin, a minister of a mosque who calls Muslims for compulsory prayer. According to the legend, Bilal added these words to the formula of the morning azan, al-salad haran min al-nahim, which means prayer is better than sleep. And when the Prophet Muhammad found out, he approved it. On the day of Muslims' conquest of Mecca, when the Prophet Muhammad entered Kaaba and destroyed all idols, Bilal climbed on the roof of Kaaba and pronounced azan in his beautiful voice, calling for compulsory prayer. Bilal is described as of dark brown color, 198, with African features and bushy hair, 199. During the Meccan period of Muhammad's activities, he and his associates were subjected to harassment, threats, boycotts, beatings, abuse, and death threats. This prompted Muhammad to relocate Muslims to Ethiopia 5 years after the proclamation of Islam, 615. This journey impressed the first Muslims and influenced future development of Islam. A number of Ethiopians who converted to Islam and went to Medina are listed in Islamic biographical sources. Ethiopians were among the Prophet Muhammad's companions. They were called Ethiopian monks 200. It was these close relations that prompted the Prophet Muhammad to declare, "Those who bring an Ethiopian man or an Ethiopian woman to their home, bring God's blessing there." 201. Another great black Arab was Atta ibn Abi Rabah, 642–732, born into a Nubian family, a people of southern Egypt and northern Sudan, who became a distinguished Muslim scientist, renowned hadith scholar and theologian. He even reached the position of Mufti of Mecca, the highest Muslim clerical position. Zayd ibn Haritha was a black warlord, Muhammad's favorite companion, the only one of his associates mentioned in the Quran. He was the adopted son of the Prophet, and before the prophetic mission began, the Prophet Muhammad declared Zayd his heir. Zayd was the second man to accept Islam, and then his wife Ayman did. He is described as having a flat nose and extremely dark brown skin. 205. His ancestors came from tribes that were early inhabitants of Yemen. He was also married to Muhammad's family member, which was considered the highest honor. Here, we have assured ourselves of African roots of Arabs and their significant influence on the formation of Islam. Now we will see how Africans together with Arabs founded the Moorish Empire on the Iberian Peninsula. The unsurpassed Mauritanian journey in Europe. Dear reader, let us now move directly to creation of the Mauritanian Empire in Europe. At the beginning of the 8th century, after a long resistance to the Arab conquest of North Africa, Moors joined the triumphal spread of Islam. As a result, they went from Morocco to the Iberian Peninsula, where their swift victories and distinctive deeds became legends. A man chosen to probe the soil in Iberia, another name of the Iberian Peninsula, was Tarif ibn Malik. He belonged to a younger generation of Islamized Berbers, impregnated with military thinking of warlords. Hassan ibn al-Numan died circa 710, and Musa bin Nusair, 640–716. Who led the Arab takeover of northwest Africa. In July 710, according to English historian Edward Gibbon, 1737–1794, Tarif, accompanied by 400 Africans and 100 Arabs, successfully An important port city, Tarifa in southern Spain, is named after him. This city was the first port in history where fees were charged from merchants for the use of berths. This is where the term tariff comes from. Thus, we find out that we use the name of this African warrior in our daily economic relations. On the basis of Tarif's intelligence operation, Arab general also of Berberian origin, from the Nafza tribe Tariq ibn Ziyad 670–720, received information that the Iberian Peninsula could be seized. Previously Musa ibn Nusayr appointed him the ruler of the western Maghreb, the territory of present-day southern Morocco. Tariq commanded an army of 10,000 people, mostly Berbers from Sanhaji Union. In 711, brave Tariq with his expeditionary forces of 7,000 Berbers and a small number of Arab translators and advocates, crossed the strait and landed near a rock that was later named in his honor, Gibraltar. The word Gibraltar is a Hispanicized version of an Arabic phrase Jabal Tariq that means Mount Tariq. Today, the territory of Gibraltar occupies a strategic position over the Strait of Gibraltar, carrying the name of warlord Tariq, connecting the Mediterranean Sea with the Atlantic Ocean, and is a NATO naval base. In August of 711, Tariq won a decisive victory over the European army. The day before this battle, Tariq raised his army's spirit by the following words: "Oh, my warriors, where would you run? The sea is behind you, the enemy is ahead of you, and all hope is for your courage and fortitude. In battle I will fight ahead of you, where the chances of surviving are especially low. Get some patience now, and later you'll get the ultimate pleasure in return. Don't think that your destiny may be separated from mine, and be sure that, if you fall in battle, I will perish with you or avenge you. Remember that I will be in front of you myself, and I will be involved in what I'm calling you for. And when the two armies are at arm's length, you will see me, and I will seek for Rada'ik, the tyrant of my people, and will call him for a battle, if it will be the will of Allah. Even if I die fighting him, you will easily find an experienced warrior among you, who will lead you further. But if I fall before I get to Rada'ik, double your eagerness, attack and conquer this country, kill him instead of me. Without him, his warriors will no longer resist you." 206. After Rada'ik's death in battle, resistance of Visigoths ran low very quickly, and Tariq with his tireless army, not wasting time to enjoy his victory, soon conquered Córdoba, Malaga, and the capital Toledo. During 1 month, General Tariq ibn Ziyad destroyed the dominance of Europeans in the Iberian Peninsula. Arab ruler of North Africa Musa ibn Nusayr, with an army of 18,000, joined Tariq in Spain and helped accomplish the conquest of Iberia. The two commanders met in Talavera de la Reina, where Moors were given the task to subdue the northwest of Spain. They commenced their mission with double strength and speed, and within 3 months they captured the entire area of the Ebro River up to the Pyrenees, annexing the land of disobedient Basque people. There they left a small branch under the command of the Berber lieutenant Munusa, who would later play a decisive role in Muslim campaigns in southern France. Although many historians call Tariq soldiers Berbers and Arabs, primary sources, such as historian Hussein, about 950 years, indicate that these troops were Sudanese. In the Arab world, black people were called Sudanese. 207. Arab writers Hajjans and Ibn al-Athir (1160–1234) also indicated this in their works, stating that there had been 700 Sudanese in Tariq's garrison. The conquest of Spain was carried out by African Muslims, not Arabs. 215. Christian primary sources describing this conquest, in particular a historical book, The History of Spain, by King Alfonso X, tell of resin-color-faced Moors, and that the most beautiful of them was as black as a pot. 176. During the victorious journey of Moors in Europe in the 9th century in order to establish economic dominance in the region, Tunisian Muslim forces captured Sicily, Italy. A large and well-organized fleet that came from the east of Spain and the western Maghreb, manned mainly by Berber warriors, facilitated this conquest. Having begun in 827, the conquest ended in assault of Palermo. Then, occupation of Messina in 842 and Syracuse in 878 followed. Later, an Arab geographer and traveler in 937 noted that blacks were very common in Palermo. One of the main entrances to the city was called Bab es-Sodan, the Gates of the Black, named after its black inhabitants. 208. Pope Leo III referred to these black warriors as Moors, Hagarenes, and Saracens. 209. The Muslim invasion of mainland Europe took place in 846, when Saracens landed at the mouth of the Tiber and besieged Rome. 210. After Rome was captured, Pope John VIII agreed to pay a tribute to Saracens in the amount of 25,000 silver marks a year, more than 6 tons of silver, for them to retreat. Holy Roman Emperor and King of Sicily and Germany Frederick II, 1197–1250, from the Hohenstaufen dynasty developed a particularly close relationship with the remaining blacks in Sicily and hired for himself a Moorish chamberlain, who was always with him. In the intense and continuing struggle against papacy, he requested assistance from Moors. So he formed an elite defense unit of 16,000 black warriors. One of the independent rulers of Moorish origin with whom Friedrich cooperated was Murat. Among the Berber tribes he is known as Sanhaji Morabit. In 1239, another black person, Johann Morris, occupied the highest position at Hohenstaufen's court. In his works, Paul Kaplan indicates the presence of black Muslims in southern Italy and Sicily throughout several centuries. 211. Among the major Berber groups that occupied Spain there were Huaras, Luwata, Masmuda, Minas, Zanata, and Sanaja. Before taking part in the conquest of Spain in the 8th century, Huaras Berbers in Africa took control of Tripolitania province and the deserts in South Tunisia. They worshipped the Libyan sun god Amun, depicted as a ram. After the conquest of Spain, they settled in Córdoba and formed a city near Jaén. Many Huaras also settled in Mérida and Medellín. Abd al-Rahman ibn Musa al-Huari was a judge in Asijo town during the rule of Abd al-Rahman III. Both Tariq ibn Ziyad and Abd al-Rahman I, the founder of the Umayyad dynasty that ruled most of Spain until 1031, belonged to the Berber Nafsa tribe. By the way, one of the most important reasons for Abd al-Rahman's success as a monarch was that he had hired a well-trained army of 40,000 Berbers from Africa. Many representatives of the Nafsa tribe settled in Spain. In Osuna, many Nafsa Berbers became public figures, writers, and theologists. They also constituted a large proportion of the Córdoba Emirate population. An Arab historian described Masmuda Berbers as black-skinned. 212. In Spain, they settled in Taifa de Moron, Córdoba, Valencia, Guadalajara, and Santander. They also settled in southern Portugal. They also achieved prosperity and high status. Abd al-Mumin, the founder of the mighty Almohad dynasty, belonged to this tribe. Berbers who captured Castile were from the Zenata tribe, which gave the name to Senegal. They spoke Kushite Hamitic language. The founders of the Almoravid dynasty were Sanhaji Berbers. Arab chronicler Al-Fassi described Emperor Yusuf from the Almoravid dynasty as brown-skinned with curly hair. 175. Among his troops there was his personal entourage of 4,000 blacks. 213. Thus, we became acquainted with a journey of the undefeated army of black warriors, who conquered the territory of the future Mauritanian Empire, and emphasized the actual crucial role of Africans in this process. Further on we will have an opportunity to appreciate the greatness of this civilization. Mauritanian Spain is a cultural center of Europe. At the end of this chapter we will examine the very civilization that evolved into Mauritanian Spain. Moors introduced silk industry in Spain. In agriculture they introduced cultivation of rice, sugarcane, dates, ginger, cotton, lemons, and strawberries. The Handbook on Agriculture, written in the 12th century by Ibn al-Awwam, was still being published even in 1802 for training of Spanish farmers. Ibn Khaldun (1332–1406) wrote on the economy, and his works are still relevant today. In his historic work The Muqaddimah, Introduction to History, Ibn Khaldun analyzed the reasons for the rise and decline of countries and nations. He discovered a vast number of fundamental notions in economics. Even before Scotsman Adam Smith (1723–1790), he discovered value and necessity of division of labor. He also was ahead of Englishman David Ricardo (1772–1823) in discovering the labor theory of value, and examined the role of the state in stabilizing the economy before Englishman John Keynes (1832–1946). Ibn Khaldun was the first economist to systematize functions of economy, indicating that technical-based specialization of production and foreign trade were important for obtaining economic surplus. He became the first scientist empowered with the idea of economic surplus. Until Ibn Khaldun, there was no scholar who would create such a consistent theory of general economics that would explain and predict the rise and decline of civilizations, countries, and empires. His teachings make it possible to predict whether a state is viable, as well as give an empirical and theoretical explanation of the effects that state policy has on production and trade. As early as in the 14th century, he stated that the price of goods and services was determined by demand and supply. Moors were also skilled engineers. During the rule of Emir Abd al-Rahman III (891–961), water supply system with lead pipes was built to transport water from the mountains to Córdoba. A piece of a beautiful irrigation system built by Moorish engineers was preserved till today. They also designed huge underground bunkers for grain storage in case of emergency. Gold, silver, copper, mercury, tin, lead, iron and alum were extensively mined. Up to the 12th century, maritime trade of Saracens in the Mediterranean exceeded the rest of Europe. Hundreds of ships were used in trade, and its volume stimulated production. Sword blades produced in Toledo were of the highest quality and the most elegant in all of Europe, and a factory near Córdoba produced 12,000 shields per year. The city of Murcia was known for production of all kinds of brass and iron tools. Tanneries of Córdoba and Morocco were the best in the world. Belts widely glorified for their bright colors and beautiful texture were produced in the city of Almería. Carpets were produced in Teuliada, and bright wool garments in Baza and Granada. Moors also produced magnificent glass and ceramic vases, mosaic and jewelry. Already in the 10th century, that became the golden age of Mauritania and Spain. The city of Córdoba looked almost like a modern city. The roads were beautifully paved, with sidewalks for pedestrians. At night, it was possible to walk 10 kilometers under the light of lanterns along a continuous series of houses on both sides of the road. And this existed hundreds of years before the first paved road appeared in Paris, or the first street lantern in London. The population of the city was 1 million inhabitants, which exceeded the population of Germany, France, England, and Italy. While the rest of Europe did not have a city with more than 30,000 inhabitants. It had 200,000 houses, 800 public schools, many colleges and universities, 10,000 wealthy palaces surrounded by beautiful gardens, not to mention the royal palaces. In Córdoba there were 5,000 mills, while in the rest of Europe there were none. There were 900 public baths, not counting countless private ones, while in the rest of Europe they were considered extremely odd and was not tolerated. There was also a network of 4,000 markets and 80,000 shops that sold Baltic amber, Russian fur, Chinese tea, Indian spices, African ebony tree, and ivory, as well as locally produced goods made of leather, metal, silk, glass, and ceramics, that could not be found anywhere else. Mauritanian cities of Toledo, Seville, and Granada were worthy competitors of Córdoba. Education was common in Mauritania and Spain and could be obtained by common citizens, whereas in Europe at that time 99% of the population were illiterate. And even kings were often unable to read and write. Moorish rulers lived in luxurious palaces, and at the same time monarchs of Germany, France, and England lived in large constructions similar to barns, without windows and chimneys, with a single hole in the roof for the release of smoke. In the middle of the 10th century, a small group of Germans accompanied a monk to a palace reception of Abd al-Rahman III, Caliph of Córdoba. The monk delivered a letter to Caliph from Otto the Great 912 to 973, Emperor of the Holy Roman Empire. The German travelers could not believe their eyes when they saw the splendor of Córdoba and the picturesque beauty of its outskirts in the province of Andalusia. They probably thought they had been bewitched and moved to some dreamland by magic. 216. The road to Caliph's residence was fitted with incredible engineering technologies, equivalents of which appeared only in our time. Because they could direct water flows, lakes, waterfalls, and luxurious fountains had been created along the road. Flowers and bushes had been brought from all over the world. Medina Azahara Palace of that time was estimated at $120 million and was declared a Spanish national cultural monument in 1923. The city of Almería was a thriving seaport with a shipbuilding plant. All Europeans went there to trade, and, as a result, so many duties were collected there that no other port could boast of. There were silk factories specializing in production of damask fabrics, brocade, and fabrics with gold and silver patterns. Thousands of artisans were involved in every direction of this large-scale silk production. The city was also characterized by the quality of glass and ceramics produced in its factories, and was notable for excellent metal products. Caliphs in the Arab Mauritanian world created enormous libraries, and intellectual life was blooming. Caliph of Córdoba al-Hakam II, 915–976, collected books from around the world in his palace, comprising 400 to 600,000 carefully structured volumes. He built 27 new schools for the poor, and, at least at that time, girls could also attend school, and many women thrived in the fields of literature, art, education, medicine, and law. It is noteworthy that in Mauritanian schools geography was taught with the help of globes long before Magellan's journey round the world in 1,519,217. In the 10th and 11th centuries, while the whole of Europe, apart from Mauritania and Spain, had barely one public library and a couple of decent universities, Spain itself had more than 70 public libraries and 17 universities. Astronomy, chemistry, physics, mathematics, geometry, philology, and geography reached the highest level in the world. Scientists and people of art joined special associations in an effort to learn. There were regular congresses in all branches of science, where the latest achievements of various researches were discussed and announced. 218. All European rulers sent expensive gifts to Mauritanian monarch Abd al-Rahman III in order to be favored in his eyes. Even kings of Rome, Constantinople, Germany, Slavonia, and other distant countries sent to him their ambassadors to petition for peace and truce, agreeing to any condition he might call. During his rule, Europeans were introduced to production of cotton. Moors also gave start to the craft of putting pictures on cloth by mallets. British archaeologist Stanley Lanepool (1854–1931) tells us that students from France, Germany, and England came to Mauritanian cities to drink from the fountain of knowledge that could only be found there. It was impossible to study in medieval Europe without knowing Arabic. 219. Muslims, Christians, and Jews lived together in harmony during the Golden Age of Mauritanian Spain. A separate architecture direction was formed, called the Mauritanian architecture. For example, Alhambra Palace Complex, built by Moors, is now on the list of World Heritage Sites. Starting from the second third of the 19th century, Alhambra began to attract European and American Romance writers and artists. In particular, it had a strong impression on Washington Irving, who lived in Spain in 1829 to 1832, as well as on George Noel Gordon Byron, François René de Chateaubriand, Victor Hugo, Edward Bulwer Lytton, and others. The Mauritanian style was vividly manifested later in the architecture of European synagogues. I would also like to point out that such European scientists as Roger Bacon (1214–1292), an English philosopher and naturalist, Johann Kepler (1571–1630), a German mathematician, astronomer, mechanic, optician and pioneer of the laws of planetary movement, Nicolaus Copernicus (1473–1543), a Polish astronomer, mathematician, mechanic, economist and author of the heliocentric system of the world, which set the beginning for the first scientific revolution, and many more others received their scientific knowledge from the works of black people, Arabs and Berbers. In the Middle Ages, Europeans received their knowledge in medicine also from the same sources. 72,221,223. Pressure from the Christian forces on the Iberian Peninsula grew, and in 1492 Granada, the last stronghold of Moors, was taken by soldiers of King Ferdinand and Queen Isabella. Moors were forced out of Spain. About 3.5 million Moors were forced out of the Spanish territories between 1492 and 1610. About 1 million Moors settled in France. Part of them went to Holland. It is curious that according to Dutch legends, a black Moor with curly hair called Black Piet was an assistant to Sinterklaas and on St. Nicholas Day delivered gifts through chimneys. 220. A number of Moors served at Scottish kings' courts. 222. Notably, in 1507 King James IV (1473–1513), the first king of the Renaissance era in Scotland, dressed as a black knight to participate in the Royal Court Knight Tournament to win a kiss of a black lady. 164. In 1596 Queen Elizabeth wrote to the leaders of major cities in the United Kingdom that there were too many Moors in England and that they should be expelled. For centuries, Mauritanian Spain was the center of civilization, the epicenter of development of art and science. No country in Europe at that time could achieve the level of culture that was flourishing in Spain. As noted by Lane Poole, a British Orientalist and professor of Arab studies at the University of Dublin, Stanley, after the expulsion of Moors, Spain was like the moon. It shone for a little while, thanks to borrowed light, and then it died out. 219. Thus, the reader was able to see that the civilization developed by black people, in particular, native Africans, and its development exceeded the rest of Europe. This empire was the cultural and educational center of Europe. It took white Europeans a long time to reach the level of civilization that already existed in Mauritanian Spain at that time. Next, we will focus on what was happening at that time in Africa. The golden age of intellectual life at the African University of Sankore. Contrary to common misconceptions, Africans were prospering in literature and art for many years prior to their contact with the Western world. If we're talking about Africans in America, they didn't get there without a cultural past. Before the collapse of the West African states of Ghana, Mali, Songhai, and an internal fight and chaos that made slave trade possible, Africans were enjoying their sophisticated intellectual life. From the 14th to the 16th centuries, West Africa was flourishing. In the 14th century, Mansa Musa, a ruler of Mali, built his palace in the city of Timbuktu, as well as a cathedral mosque with a distinctive tower. The University of Sankore, which was the intellectual center of Africa, was also located there. French researcher Félix Dubois (1862–1945), describing the city, said that the most educated representatives of Islam were amazed by its scholars. These African scholars were at the same level as Arab specialists and therefore were professors in Morocco and Egypt. In turn, Arabs did not always comply with the requirements of Sankore. A great number of surviving manuscripts attests to the brilliance of this educational facility. The number of manuscripts is estimated at 400 to 700,000. Most of them are in astronomy, music, biology, and Pietism. Latter manuscripts focus on Islamic law, mathematics, and history. Some 25,000 students studied there and could receive 4 different degrees. After the transition of Timbuktu to being under Moroccan rule in 1591, scholars began to be persecuted. Many were forced to leave the city, and Sankore came to a decline. UNESCO has recognized the University of Sankore a World Heritage Monument. Ahmed Baba was the last rector of the university and was one of the greatest African scholars in the late 16th century. His life is an excellent example of the extent and depth of intellectual activity in West Africa prior to the colonial period. He wrote more than 40 books, each one on a different subject. His library consisted of 1,600 books. The value of Timbuktu as a religious and cultural center is illustrated by a West African Muslim proverb: salt arrives from the north, gold from the south. And the word of God and wisdom come from Timbuktu. From the 13th to the 17th century, it was the world center for Muslim education. So, in this chapter, we've witnessed the greatest civilization created by black people. You could assure yourself in African origins of Moors who'd founded and developed this empire. Finally, you've also been provided an opportunity to see that intellectual life of Africans had flourished without any help from Europeans. In the next chapter, we will get acquainted with outstanding Africans who significantly influenced the development of Europe in modern age. Fundamental truths. Black people, especially Negroes, were called Moors. Berbers were known as the inhabitants of Africa in the west of Egypt. Surviving documents describe Saracens as black. The Arabian Peninsula in ancient times was populated by black people. The Sabaean kingdom was characterized by the matriarchal system. Kushites created the first civilization on the territory of Arabia. The Prophet Muhammad had African roots. Muhammad's associates were Africans. Preliminary exploration of the Iberian Peninsula was carried out by Berber Tarif. Predominantly African troops, led by Berber Tariq, won the decisive victory over the European army. The conquest of Spain was carried out mainly by Muslim Africans, not Arabs. After the takeover of Rome, Pope John VIII agreed to pay a tribute to Saracens in the amount of 25,000 silver marks a year, more than 6 tons of silver, so they would retreat. Abd al-Rahman I, the founder of the Umayyad dynasty that ruled most of Spain until 1031, belonged to a Berber tribe. Moors introduced silk industry in Spain. As early as the 10th century, the Mauritanian city of Córdoba looked almost like a modern city. The population of Córdoba was 1 million citizens, which exceeded the population of Germany, France, England, and Italy altogether. It had 200,000 houses, 800 public schools, many colleges and universities, 10,000 wealthy palaces surrounded by beautiful gardens. The Mauritanian city of Almeria was a thriving seaport with a shipbuilding plant. Caliphs of the Arab Mauritanian world created enormous libraries, and intellectual life was blooming. Students from France, Germany, and England came to Mauritanian cities to drink from the fountain of knowledge that could only be found there. The Mauritanian civilization developed by black people, in particular, native Africans, and its development exceeded the rest of Europe. Contrary to common misconceptions, Africans were prospering in literature and art for many years prior to their contact with the Western world. Self-assessment test. 1. What influence did Africans have on the Arab Islamic world? 1. They were native inhabitants of Arabia. 2. They had a fundamental influence on the development of Islam. 3. Both A and B are correct. 3. 4. None. 1. 1. What role did Africans play in the 8th century conquest of the Iberian Peninsula? 1. They conducted a reconnaissance expedition to establish a strategy for the subsequent offensive. 1. 2. They led a direct military campaign. 2. 3. They constituted a large part of the army that defeated the European forces. 2. 4. All of the above options are correct. 3. 1. What did Mauritania and Spain exceed the rest of Europe in? 1. Urban development. 1. 2. Development of intellectual life. 2. 3. Agricultural and industrial development. 2. 4. All of the above options are correct. 3. 1. Determine the level of educational sphere development in medieval Africa. 1. There were local universities in Africa. 3. 2. Africans received education only from Americans and Europeans. 1. 3. Africans achieved a certain development in antiquity, but subsequently in terms of science they remained in the background. 2. Results of the test for assessment. Less than 7 points. Unfortunately, although you are familiar with the subject of the Mauritanian Empire, you have no data on its superior position in medieval Europe. It will also be useful for you to learn about the role of black people, especially Africans, in creation and development of this European cultural center. For your study we offer Professor G. Jackson's book, Introduction to African Civilizations. 2. 7 to 10 points. Not bad. You are different from many people because you know the role of Africans in the Arab Islamic world, some achievements of the Mauritanian civilization and the participation of Africans in it. However, this knowledge is not complete, and you still do not fully appreciate this role of Africans. 11 to 12 points. Great. This era of history is well known to you. This allows you to avoid speculating about inferiority of black people to white. You operate enough facts that give you the opportunity to see the important role of Africans in spiritual, social and logistical development of European and world civilizations. Practical assignments. 1. What innovations did Moors create in medieval Europe? 2. Name outstanding black persons in Islam. 3. For yourself make a comparison of the intellectual and technical spheres of Mauritania and Spain and that of the rest of Europe. 4. What is the importance of having universities in Africa even before the slave trade and colonization period? Chapter 5. Africans as key persons in the modern age Europe. Dear reader, in this chapter we will get acquainted with creators of Europe's history in the post-medieval period. Appearance of racism is linked to the era of geographical discoveries by Europeans that gave start to the so-called modern age Europe. Theories of ancestral inferiority of some peoples were shaped to justify colonization policies that were often accompanied by extermination or enslavement of local inhabitants. According to racist standpoints, racial differences have a decisive influence on history and culture. You will be able to confirm the opposite not only in terms of African and black people civilizations considered earlier, but also in terms of specific persons that lived in the period of development of racism and were its living refutation. Africans in Western Europe. The period of the modern age in Europe was determined by spiritual and cultural factors. It will therefore be very important to pay attention to the spiritual and cultural life of African notable figures. In relation to Western Europe, we will focus on individuals who influenced music, literature, spirituality, philosophy, and politics. In addition to their achievements, little-known facts concerning their ties to their African roots will also be highlighted. Joseph Bellone de Saint-Georges, a French composer by nickname Black Mozart. Joseph Bellone (1745–1799) was a French composer of classical music, conductor, violin virtuoso, royal musketeer, who received a nickname Black Mozart. His mother was an African slave, and his father was a French plantation owner. Born in the French colony of Guadeloupe, he achieved the highest social status in France thanks to his fencing skills and genius in European classical music. His diverse career is beautifully depicted in a painting by Mathera Brown, an American historical artist, painted in London in 1787. The portrait depicts him dressed as a conductor, but instead of his baton he is holding his sword. He was later named Chevalier de Saint-Georges, which was a noble title. Europeans at that time considered Africans an inferior race, and because of his African origin, Saint-Georges was restricted in many rights under the French law. Mixed marriages were banned at that time, and he found himself part of a despised social class of mulattoes. However, thanks to his continuing efforts, he not only succeeded but also overcame the existing racial barriers. During his education, by day he learned mathematics, history, foreign languages, music, drawing, and dancing. And after that he studied fencing. The son of his teacher, a famous fencer Nicolas Texier de la Boissière, stated that even at the age of 15 he won from the best fencing masters. and at 17 he developed the highest speed of movement one could imagine. He was often seen swimming to the other bank of the Seine, using only one arm. In running, he was one of the fastest in Europe. He mastered harpsichord and violin, and he was accepted into the royal gendarmerie. As a violin virtuoso, he gave concerts in England and France. Saint Georges also became a member of a famous French composer Gossic's orchestra, and soon became its conductor. In the Music Almanac magazine, the orchestra was named the best in Paris, and perhaps in Europe. He then headed the Masonic Olympic Lodge Orchestra. He was one of the first black Masons in France. The orchestra ordered 6 so-called Paris symphonies from the Austrian composer Haydn, and under the direction of Chevalier de Saint-Georges played them for the first time. French Queen Marie Antoinette attended the premiere, and she loved the 85th Symphony, which was then named the Queen. French King Louis XVI was going to appoint Chevalier de Saint-Georges as director of the Royal Opera. But the appointment was not made due to protests of several artists who thought it below their dignity to work under direction of a mulatto. Saint-Georges is the author of concerts, symphonies, string quartets, violin concerts, sonatas for violin and harpsichord, and musical comedies. He directed a private musical theatre of Madame de Montesson, the wife of the Duke of Orleans, and gave music lessons to Queen Marie Antoinette. He is known for his fencing fight with the legendary Chevalier d'Anne in the presence of the Prince of Wales' future King George IV. He was also the first black colonel of the French army. Today there are streets named after him in Guadeloupe and Paris 152. On the example of his life, we can see a magnificent will of a black man who, despite contemptuous disregard of him by part of society, became so successful and influential through his hard work. Alessandro de' Medici, the Black Head of the Republic of Florence. Alessandro de' Medici (1510–1537) was the first black head of state in modern history of the West 179. He was the first one from a senior line of the Medici who ruled Florence wearing the title of Duke. He was also the Duke of the Italian city of Penne. His father was either Lorenzo II de' Medici, grandson of Lorenzo the Magnificent, or Giulio de' Medici, later Pope Clement VII, nephew of Lorenzo the Magnificent. Historians suggest that he was born to a black woman who was a servant at the Medici house. In documents she is mentioned as Simonetta da Calavecchio. Alessandro's nickname was the Moor, which related to his appearance. In 1531, 19-year-old Alessandro became the ruler of the Republic of Florence with the title Capo, the head. The head of the Republic was a member of all government committees and also held the position of Gonfalonier of Justice for the term of his life. 1 year later, Emperor Charles V of the Holy Roman Empire granted him the hereditary title of Duke. The emperor supported Alessandro in his struggle against pro-Republic Florentines. He even married off his daughter Margherita to him. Please note, dear reader, this is a very significant moment. Usually in a society where racism is present, people never want to marry their daughter to a black man. It means we have something to learn from the emperor who made the greatest contribution to history among the rulers of that time. Saint Benedict, a black monk of the Franciscan order. Saint Benedict the Moor (1526–1589), is also known as Saint Benedict the Black, was a monk of the Franciscan order, and is now venerated in Catholic and Lutheran churches. He was born into a family of African Christian slaves living in Sicily, Italy. Because of his parents' dedicated service, he was granted freedom at 18 years of age. He did not attend any school and remained illiterate for the rest of his life. Joining a local hermit group, he became their leader and made a pilgrimage to Syria and Egypt. Although he was unable to read, he was highly respected for the deepest, most extensive and insightful understanding of theology and the scripture, and was frequently consulted for guidance and advice. It is also known that miracles of healing of the sick occurred through him. They say he predicted the day he was going to die. He was beatified by Pope Benedict XIV in 1743 and canonized by Pope Pius VII in 1807. Honoring Saint Benedict the More is common in the United States, Mexico, Central and South America, including Argentina, Brazil, and Venezuela. He is remembered for his self-possession and sensitivity when he was humiliated on racial grounds. Later he was declared the patron saint of African Americans. The next chapter will provide a careful review of the impact that Africans had on Christianity. We will tell you of far more key Africans in church history. Here we can see a representative of this age and this sphere. And, as you recall, it was the spiritual and cultural factor that marked Europe of the modern age. So it is remarkable that African Saint Benedict the More was such a spiritual person. Adolf Baden, an African servant of the Swedish royal court. African Adolf Gustav Baden, 1747–1750–1822, was an important member of the Swedish royal court. He was a butler of the Swedish Queen, Louisa Ulrika of Prussia, and Princess Sophia Albertine. His real name was Cucci, and he was born in 1747, either in Africa or on St. Croix in the Caribbean Sea, which was a Danish colony. He only remembered that when he had been a child, he had lived in an unbearably hot cabin. In 1757, a captain of a Danish ship has bought Baden, and later gave him as a present to the Queen of Sweden, Louisa Ulrika. Under her guidance, Baden was converted to Christianity, learned French, German, and Latin. His childhood friend was the future King of Sweden, Gustav III, and other members of the royal family. They say that Baden knew all the secrets of the royal entourage. He was very straightforward and spoke on equal terms even with the king and the queen. On her deathbed, the queen sent Baden to Stockholm, giving him the keys to her personal files. That's how much she trusted him and was sure of him. Later, when these files were safely handed over to the prince and the princess, they burned them, and King Gustav III became furious and wanted to kill Baden. To these threats, he only replied, "My head is in the power of your majesty. But I could not act in a different way." In this case we see a man of honor who, even under threat of death, could remain faithful to his promises. On Princess Sophia Albertina's birthday, he wrote to her, "I, one of the black people, unfamiliar with this country's customs, still send best wishes from my heart to our princess too." Baden played in theater and was a ballet dancer. He sometimes helped Carl Michael Bellman, a Swedish poet and composer, to write poems for special events, and some of them were published under his name. Among other things, he was a traveling ambassador, a royal forecaster, and a court chess player. His library consisted of up to 900 different volumes. He was granted several titles, such as Chamberlain, Court Secretary, Ballet Master, and Official State Servant. He was part of a number of fraternities, orders, and Masonic lodges. He was described as an intellectual, trustworthy, and confident. So far, his journals, written in French, are kept in the Uppsala University Library. This African is appealing not only because he was a good public servant and very versatile as a human being, but especially because of his personality. Any state leader, and indeed any superior, would like to see as part of their staff an African who would not trade his honor for anything, even under threat of death. Juan Latino, a black Spanish scholar and poet of the 16th century. Juan Latino, 1518–1597, was born into a family of African slaves from West Africa and became a professor of rhetoric, Greek, and Latin at the University of Granada in the 16th century. He was brought to Spain from Africa. In his youth he studied Latin and Greek and graduated from the University of Granada. He became so skillful in Latin that he changed his slave name and became known as Juan Latino. He published 3 volumes of poems. His heroic poem, Austria Carmen, was devoted to the victory of Spanish warlord John of Austria in the War of the Alpujarras. He is considered the first representative of the Negro peoples to have published a collection of poems in a European language, 145,150,179. Note that this is not the first time that Africans became outstanding individuals, despite their starting conditions. It is very significant that without any fortunate starting platform, Africans have been able to achieve spectacular results. Dumas, an outstanding family of African-French origin. Thomas Alexander Dumas (1762–1806), later a French general, was a son of a black slave of African descent, Marie Cécile Dumas, and French Marquis David de la Pelleterie. When Thomas Alexander decided to enlist in the Royal Guard as a simple soldier, his father, the Marquis, was strictly against his son tarnishing the family name by serving in the army. As a result, Thomas Alexander took only his second name and the name of his mother. So under the name Alexander Dumas he entered into the regiment of Queen Marie Antoinette as a dragoon. In the regiment, he quickly became famous for his Hercules exploits. It is reported that no one, except him, could clamp a horse on its sides and, by grabbing a stable's beam, pull himself up with the horse. No one, except him, could put his 4 fingers in 4 rifle barrels and carry all 4 rifles on an outstretched arm. This athlete read Caesar and Plutarch, but was recruited under a common name. And it took a revolution to make him an officer. During the revolution, Dumas built a highly successful military career. He was a corporal, lieutenant colonel, brigadier, and division general. With only a few people in his squad, he captured Mount Cenis, where Austrians were sitting on a sheer cliff. After getting to the top, his men stopped before a palisade of the enemy, not knowing how to overcome it. "Let me through," said the general, and, grabbing his soldiers by their pants, threw them through the palisade directly at the terror-struck enemy. Napoleon appointed Dumas commander of the cavalry, and in a short time they became close friends. Dumas himself was worth a whole squadron. His legendary exploits may seem unbelievable, but still, they are not imaginary. From Bonaparte's letters we learn that General Dumas personally recaptured 6 flags from a numerically superior enemy, that skillfully interrogating a spy, he found out the plans of Austrians. That under Mantua, he stopped Wurmser's army. In this particular battle he changed his wounded horses twice. Austrians called him Black Devil. General Thibaut, who served with him, described him in this way: "There was another divisional general serving under General Masséna, a mulatto by the name of Dumas. A man who was very capable and, moreover, one of the most courageous, most powerful and most nimble people I have ever seen. He was extraordinarily popular in the army and everyone talked about his chivalry and incredible physical strength." During the march from Alexandria to Cairo during the Egyptian campaign, there was an unsuccessful French attempt to conquer Egypt and Levant in which the commander of the French cavalry Dumas negatively commented on Napoleon's expedition, and apparently assessed Bonaparte's qualities as the commander-in-chief of the campaign. He then demanded to be transferred back to France. The request was granted and he left Egypt on an old boat which had to be put aground in the southern part of the Italian kingdom of Naples, where he was taken prisoner and thrown into a dungeon. His former friend Napoleon did not make a single attempt to rescue him from there. In prison, they tried to poison him several times, and only after his health was broken, was he released. Dumas died at the age of 43. The name Thomas Alexander Dumas is engraved on the southern wall of the Arc de Triomphe in Paris. In 2009, a monument to General Dumas was opened at General Catrou Square in Paris. The monument is called Furs, Shackles, Fetters, and has a form of slave shackles, more than 5 meters high and weighing several tons. Let us now learn about astonishing results of his son, Alexander Dumas. He became a playwright, journalist and one of the most renowned French authors in the world, whose best-known characters were inspired by the life of General Dumas. Due to the fact that Alexander Dumas' son was also named Alexander, he was called Alexander Dumas Père, to distinguish him from his son. Because the family was left without any means of existence after the death of Thomas Alexander, Alexander received education by his own effort by reading a lot. After moving to Paris, during the first 6 years of his life there without any money, literary ties, and finally, without a systematic education, he became famous and was accepted as an equal in the circle of great writers of Romanticism, Victor Hugo, Alfred de Vigny, Béranger, and Charles Nodier, who became his patron. He published historical and adventure novels in newspapers, which made him a globally renowned writer. The Three Musketeers, and two sequels 20 years after, and The Vicomte de Bragelonne. 10 years later, The Count of Monte Cristo, Queen Margot, La Dame de Montsoreau, The Two Dianas, The 45 Guardsmen. The writer's literary heritage is astonishing. A complete collection of his works includes more than 1,000 volumes. So far no one has been able to displace him from the first place in the list of world's most prolific literary figures in the world. He even wrote a classical cooking book, so diverse were his interests and abilities. His works have been translated into 100 languages and about 200 films have been made based on his novels. Alexandre Dumas was a Alexandre Dumas was a quadroon. This term was used for people whose one ancestor in the second generation belonged to the Negroid race. He was very proud of his African roots. One day he answered to an ill-wisher trying to hurt him, "My father was a mulatto, my grandfather was a Negro, and my great-grandfather was a monkey. You see, my lord, my family begins where yours ends." He said that after he had discovered that he was of African descent, and he decided to act so that people could see what was under his skin. Historian Dieudonné Nomencou describes a situation when Alexandre Dumas sat in the front row in the Versailles during a performance of African-American Ira Aldridge, who had a wild temperament. His best role was Shakespeare's Othello, and in the final scene, he became so tense that his mouth was foaming and his eyes became bloodshot. This time, impressed by Aldridge's excellent performance, Alexander jumped on the stage, hugged him, and said, "I'm a Negro too." 136. In another case, when his daughter was getting married to a member of an aristocratic family, he invited many Africans from Paris. The groom's mother was shocked. He did not stop there and said, "They are my relatives who also want to be present." 128. In 2002, 132 years after his death, he was reburied at the Panthéon of Paris, at the entrance to which the inscription reads, "To great men from a grateful fatherland." President Jacques Chirac, while acknowledging that racism existed in France, noted that the reburial was a correction of misconduct. The son of Alexandre Dumas was Alexandre Dumas Fils, a playwright and writer. He was elected an honorary member of the French Academy, which was the highest intellectual recognition for a Frenchman. He was also decorated with the Legion of Honor. Belonging to the order is the highest mark of distinction, honor and official recognition of special merit in France. Despite his well-known name and his famous father, Alexandre Dumas Fils found the power to break out of the glory of his parent and make his own name. Thanks to honesty, openness, and closeness to the people, Dumas Fils acquired world fame, which is still not inferior in any way to great artistic figures of France, whose works have been successful throughout the world. He became an innovator in the transition from romantic to realistic drama, and was not afraid to ridicule social problems in his works, or even to offer their solutions. As we have seen, this family of African descent had an unbelievable impact on the development of France and world culture in general. There were both phenomenal physical abilities and an intelligent leap of centennial proportions. John Blanc, a black musician in the entourage of an English king. African John Blanc was one of the most famous musicians in the early 16th century and a famous excellent trumpeter at the court of King Henry VIII. 197. In fact, he served as a staff musician at the court of Henry VII and Henry VIII, where he was paid 8 pence a day. In accounting records of the royal court there are records of monthly salary payments in pound sterling to John Blanc, a black trumpeter. He was praised the most after participating in a prestigious Westminster tournament of 1511, one of the most impressive and expensive spectacles of the time. A tournament scroll, which was dedicated to the birth of the king's son and is stored at the Herald's College, twice depicts John Blanc as one of the 6 trumpeters in the royal entourage, mounted on a horse. Note that he wasn't just a musician. The quality of his game was worthy of the royal entourage. This black man was chosen from the entire population of England. Olad Ekwano, a visionary of the movement for abolition of slavery in Great Britain. Olad Ekwano, 1745–1797, known in his lifetime as Gustavus Vasa, was one of the most famous fighters for abolition of slavery in Britain in the 18th century. Originally, he was from the Nigerian Igbo people. A slave in his youth, he later bought his freedom, was a sailor and merchant in South and North America, as well as in the Arctic. As a distinguished writer, even during the American Revolution he wrote letters to Queen Charlotte of Mecklenburg-Strelitz, who was the wife of King George III of England and grandmother of Queen Victoria 187. His autobiography, that realistically depicted the horrors of slavery, influenced the views of his contemporaries. Shortly after his death, the Slave Trade Act was passed in 1807. As a result of the adoption of this act, the United Kingdom pressurized other countries to stop slave trade. In particular, the transatlantic slave trade of the United States was banned the same month. Also due to the adoption of the act, facilitated by Olad Ekwano, slave trade was banned in Portugal, France, Holland, Sweden, and Spain. This African is venerated in the Church of England, and every year on July 30 he is honored for his efforts in abolishing slavery and slave trade, together with William Wilberforce and Thomas Clarkson. The study of his life and achievements is included in the British national curriculum. In this African we see a true history maker. Make notice of how global his impact on life of the Western world was. We can say that he has directly determined the state of a harmonious Western society that exists today. Africans in the Russian Empire. A position of a black emir of the highest court existed in the Russian Empire. According to the Dall Dictionary, black emir means a man from a black tribe, black-skinned man from hot countries, and also a position at court. For the first time black emir servants appeared in Russia at the court of the mother of King Mikhail Fedorovich 1596–1645. In the first quarter of the 18th century, a black emir position was fixed as part of court staff. In times of Catherine the Great 1729–1796 there were 10 black emirs in Tsar's service. At the beginning of the 19th century, their numbers rose to 20. In documents from the mid-19th and early 20th centuries, black servants were called Arabs of the highest court. In times of Nicholas I 1796–1855, the number of black emirs decreased to 8. Black emirs were part of a moving team of servants and always followed the court. In the palace they took shifts at the doors of interior halls. They were considered not only part of the court but a rather privileged group. At the beginning of the 20th century, a senior black emir's annual salary was 800 rubles, and a junior black emir's 600 rubles. In 1857 Alexander II (1818–1881) approved the uniform of court servants, which remained almost unchanged until the early 20th century. Black emir's court dress consisted of 16 elements, and at the beginning of the 20th century it cost 500 rubles. For comparison, an ordinary men's suit in St. Petersburg cost 6 rubles, and dress code of chamber farrier and chamber cossack cost 408 and 418 rubles respectively. At the turn of the 19th and 20th centuries, one of the Arabs of the highest court was a native of the Green Cape Islands, West Africa, Jorge Maria, the founder of the family who still live in St. Petersburg. Jorge Maria died in 1912, leaving 5 children behind: Victor, Sergei, Nikolai, Jorge, and Ekaterina. After the revolution his sons worked in factories, and in 1941 they were drafted to the ranks of the Red Army. One of them, Nikolai Georgievich Maria, died in 1943 at the Sinyavensky swamps. Another son, Jorge Georgievich Maria, went through the entire war 173. Our other hero was brought to Peter the Great as a gift. Ibrahim Hannibal, African general of the Russian army. Ibrahim Hannibal (1696–1781) was a general-in-chief of the Russian army, chief military engineer, favorite of Peter the Great, and grandfather of A. Pushkin. He was born in 1799 in Africa, either in Ethiopia or Cameroon, and was the son of a black African prince and vassal of the Turkish Sultan. When he was 7, Ibrahim was abducted along with his brother and brought to Constantinople, from where in 1705 Sava Ragazinski, who was in Russian diplomatic service, brought the brothers as a gift to Peter the Great. In the Vilnius Church of Paraskeva the boys accepted Orthodoxy. Their godfathers were Tsar Peter the Great himself, who gave him his patronymic and surname Petrov, and Queen Christiane Eberhardine of Poland, the wife of King August II. Ibrahim got a Russified name Abram, and his brother got a name Alexei. Abram Petrovich was always beside the Tsar, sleeping in his room, accompanying him during his walks. Peter the Great trusted him with various errands, including secret assignments. He became an orderly and secretary to the Tsar. Then he went abroad with His Majesty and stayed in France, studying arts, science, and military science. At that time, Abram received a salary of 100 rubles per year. He was fluent in several languages and quite good at mathematics and geometry. During the Spanish War he rose to the rank of captain. In Paris, he became friends with such personalities of the Age of Enlightenment as Denis Diderot, Montesquieu, and Voltaire. Voltaire called him the dark star of the Age of Enlightenment. On his return to Russia after completing his studies in France, Peter the Great met him several miles from Moscow. He was assigned to the Preobrazhensky Regiment as engineer lieutenant of a bomber company, whose captain was the Tsar himself. He took the name Hannibal in honor of African Hannibal Barca, the Carthaginian warlord we've discussed earlier. Also in an official letter he sent to Empress Elizabeth in 1742 he requested the right to use a family crest decorated with an African elephant in letters FVMMO. In Kotoko language, spoken in Nigeria, Cameroon, and Chad, this means homeland. His grandson A. Pushkin in his work The Black Amura of Peter the Great has repeatedly called him a Negro, African, and black. A few years after Peter the Great's death, Hannibal was appointed a major in Tobolsk garrison, and later became a captain of Engineer Corps. This time he was seconded to Pernov to teach mathematics and drafting to conductors, and later became a commander of Pernov fortified area. Note that it was not shameful for Russian Tsars to have an African teach science to Russians. It's a great example that if a person surpasses us in something, it's perfectly normal to learn from them. And yet, skin color does not play any role whatsoever. Great Russian rulers understood that. Later he was appointed a commandant of Revel by Empress Elizabeth and awarded with a number of estates. Also he was listed as a gentleman-in-waiting, the high court rank. The same year Elizabeth granted him palace lands with hundreds of servants in Voronezhsky district of Pskov province, where Hannibal founded a manor, later named Petrosco. His attitude towards serfs was unusual for that time. Thus, renting a part of Regola village to German Joachim von Tieren, he included paragraphs prohibiting corporal punishment of serfs and increasing established standards of statute labor into their tenancy agreement. And when von Tieren violated these paragraphs, Hannibal terminated the agreement. In this we see nobility of this African. Despite his status, he did not differentiate himself from ordinary people, but treated them with compassion. He was even appointed to handle land demarcation cases with Sweden. Then he was transferred to Engineers Corps and became a managing engineer of the whole Russia, directed construction of fortifications of the Tobol-Ishim line, as well as the Kronstadt-Riga, Petersburg and other lines. He also directed construction and maintenance of the Kronstadt Canal. At the same time he established a hospital for workers of the canal, and later opened a school in Kronstadt for children of workers and craftsmen. He was decorated with orders of St. Anna and St. Alexander Nevsky. Again, we see distinctive values of this African that demonstrate his high morals. It is said that the great general Alexander Suvorov owed his military career to Hannibal, who had convinced Alexander's father to let him become a serviceman. Hannibal's contribution to the development of potato farming in Russia is well known. The first potato bed appeared in Russia in Peter the Great's time, who grew potatoes hoping to use them as a medical plant. In the 1760s, Catherine the Great decided that earth apples could be used during years of hunger and instructed Abram Hannibal, who was familiar with this plant, to start growing potatoes in his manor. Thus, Hannibal's manor became the first place in Russia where potato fields appeared, first small and then quite extensive. They soon spread to neighboring estates. Peasants initially were very cautious about earth apples, but in some years potatoes saved people from starvation, and gradually their lack of trust was lost. So now when we eat fried potatoes, potato pancakes, vareniki with potatoes and so on, we know we can thank African Hannibal for this opportunity. Hannibal's son Peter became Major General of Artillery. We'll talk more about his other son, Ivan Hannibal, the Afro-Russian founder of Kherson City. Ibrahim Hannibal's eldest of 11 children was Ivan Abramovich (1735–1801), a Russian military commander-in-chief of the Black Sea Fleet, who stormed the Turkish fortress of Navarino, helping Greeks in their fight for independence. He served in naval artillery, participated in many sea battles, demonstrating courage and ingenuity. He became a major general and was decorated with the Order of St. Anna. He was later appointed General Master of Ceremonies of Naval Artillery and was a member of the Admiralty Board, the highest authority of the Russian naval affairs. He became Lieutenant General and was decorated with the Order of St. Alexander Nevsky and the Order of St. Vladimir, first degree. He resigned as General-in-Chief. Under the direction and with participation of Ivan Hannibal, the city of Kherson was founded in 1778. Now one of Kherson's squares is named after him. The Empress presented him with a jewelry box for tobacco with her portrait on it and the estate on the territory of present-day village of Belozerka in Kherson region, Ukraine. Is it not amazing that a man of African descent was responsible for building a regional center of Ukraine? And now, by the way, 300,000 people live there. Alexander Pushkin, the Afro-Russian father of Russian literature. Alexander Sergeyevich Pushkin, 1799–1837, grandson of Ibrahim Hannibal on his mother's side, is considered the father of Russian literature. He had a dark face, thick lips, and curly hair. He clearly considered himself a black man and identified himself with African slaves in America. In 1824, in one of his letters he called Negroes his brothers 156. In the foreword to the first edition of Eugene Onegin, Pushkin wrote the author is of African origin on his mother's side, Volume 4, page 455. In philology, Pushkin is regarded as the creator of modern Russian literary language, and the Brief Encyclopedia of Literature notes high standards of his work. Similar to the works of Dante 1265–1321 in Italy or Goethe 1749–1832 in Germany. Historian Alison Blakely called him a counterpart of Shakespeare. Writer Maxim Gorky 1868–1936 compared the place Pushkin holds in Russian literature to Leonardo's place in European art. Tsar Nicholas I, who was afraid of Pushkin's influence, called him the most intelligent man in Russia. Is it, then, possible to speak of some inferiority of people of African descent? On the contrary, we see that he has become the best representative of Russia from an intellectual and cultural point of view. In his lifetime he was called a genius, including in print. From the second half of the 1820s, he was considered the first Russian poet, not only among his contemporaries but also among Russian poets of all times. Further, we will present authoritative assessments of him as an individual and of his results. Maxim Gorky called Pushkin the world's greatest artist, the greatest Russian poet, a giant, a person of marvelous talent unmatched with anyone else, the beginning of all, the greatest pride of Russia, and the most complete expression of Russia's spiritual power. He also considered him one of the creators of Russian language and a pioneer of poetry who had put unshakable grounds for everything that would follow him in the field of Russian art. Without Pushkin, there would be no Gogol, to whom he gave the topic of the Inspector General, Lev Tolstoy, Turgenev, Dostoevsky. All these great Russian people recognized Pushkin as their spiritual father. Here we see the undeniable fact: Russians are proud of a man of African descent. Fyodor Dostoevsky himself, 1821–1881, claimed that had there been no Pushkin there would have been no talents that followed. Commenting on his poem, Onegin, he said Pushkin appeared to be a great people's writer like no one ever before, and spoke of universality and pan-humanism of his genius. 160. Please note this powerful word, peoples. This title will further be confirmed by others. It means that people can regard those of different race as part of their commonwealth. In this case, not just as its part but as the highest expression of its spiritual component. This was well noted by writer Nikolai Gogol, 1809–1852, who wrote that Pushkin was an extraordinary phenomenon and perhaps the only appearance of Russian spirit. A Russian man of such development that might only appear 200 years later. Critic and philosopher Occidentalist V. G. Belinsky, 1811–1848, called him the first artist and poet of Russia. Naturally, it is impossible to tear art out of African blood, because they are its creators, as we have seen in the first chapters of this book. Writer Ivan Turgenev, 1818–1883, noted that Pushkin had accomplished two tasks that in other countries usually took centuries: formed the language and created the literature. 154. Literary critic Nikolai Dobrolubov, 1836–1861, believed that Pushkin was of great importance, not only for the history of Russian literature, but also for the Russian Enlightenment as such. He was the first one to begin teaching Russian audience to read and made Russian language famous. Thus, this personality played a decisive role in formation of civilization in Russia. Writer and critic Anatoly Lunacharsky, 1875–1933, said that Pushkin was Russian spring, Russian morning, and Russian atom. And philosopher Nikolai Chernyshevsky, 1828–1889, claimed that even then he made way for future development of Russian literature. Russian philologist Dmitry Likhachov, 1906–1999, called Pushkin. Writer Taffy, 1872–1952, called him a miracle of Russia. Poet and critic Inogan Tianinsky, 1855–1909, wrote, "Everything we had before Pushkin grew and lingered toward him, towards its yet unseen but already promised sun." Poet Konstantin Balmont, 1867–1942, also compared him to the sun in the following way: Pushkin was indeed the sun of Russian poetry, extending its rays to a great distance and bringing to life an endless number of large and small satellites. Writer Alexander Herzen, 1812–1870, called Pushkin Russian to the marrow of his bones. The most inclusive characteristic was offered by poet and critic Apollon Grigoriev, 1822–1864, who said, "And Pushkin is our everything." There are dozens of monuments to Pushkin in different cities of Russia and the world. Museums dedicated to the poet's life and work are found in Moscow, St. Petersburg, Pushkin-Ugorsky District, Novgorod, Torzhok, Kiev, Chisinau, Gurzov, Odessa, Vilnius, Brodziany, Slovakia, and other cities. The former town of Tsarskoye Selo and a number of other towns are named after Pushkin. He was able to achieve all this at 37 years old. We will finish our study of outstanding black personalities of the modern-age Europe on this great descendant of the African general of the Russian army. Further in this chapter we will look at the other side of this period of European development, which shows Europeans from a very negative side. Crimes of Europeans and the struggle of Africans for national freedom. After Egypt was captured by Persians in 525 BC, a series of other foreign occupations followed. After Persians, Macedonians came, led by Alexander 333 BC. Then Romans came, headed by Julius Caesar 50 BC, and Arabs in the 7th century. Numerous libraries and cultural sites in Africa were destroyed as a result of the conquests. From 8th to 19th century, Africans were sold as slaves to Islamic countries. In 1498, Portuguese ships sailed to the shores of East Africa. Local inhabitants showed them plenty hospitality, believing in their decency, and brought them many gifts. 47. But what actually happened was Portuguese were examining the lands. And in 1505 Francisco de Almeida, the first Portuguese viceroy of India, that is of the territory from South Africa to Southeast Asia, sent a fleet of 21 ships to conquer the land discovered by previous expeditions. Since then, importation of African slaves into Western Europe began. From the 15th to the 19th century, Europeans were conducting the Atlantic slave trade. At the end of the 15th century, Portuguese de facto controlled the west coast of Africa, where they started active slave trade. They were followed by other Europeans. The Dutch, the French, and the English also went to Africa. It is estimated that in total 15 million African slaves were sent to European colonies in America. But for every living black slave there were 3 or 4 black slaves who died during manhunt and transportation. Approximately 1.2 to 2.4 million Africans died during transportation across the Atlantic Ocean. Even more died after arrival on land. The Atlantic slave trade existed in Africa for more than 300 years, and the demand for African slaves stimulated its progress. The African peoples weakened by slave trade were not given a chance to recover even after its abolition, as it was followed by European colonization of Africa. In the second half of the 19th century, especially after the Berlin Conference in 1884, the process of colonization of Africa acquired such a scale that it was called the Race for Africa. By 1900, apart from the remaining independent Ethiopia and Liberia, almost the entire continent was divided between a number of European states: Britain, France, Germany, Belgium, Italy, and Spain and Portugal slightly expanded their old colonies. In early 1889, Russian colonists, led by Nikolai Ivanovich Ashanov, tried to acquire territories on the coast of Somalia and reserve them for the Russian Empire. But France, claiming these territories, expelled the Russian colonists. According to a group of authors of the study, The Impact of Colonialism on African Economic Development from the University of Tennessee, 9, the goal of colonization was exploitation of physical, human and economic resources in favor of a colonizing country. Intensification of colonization and division of Africa by European states halted natural development of the African economy. One of the consequences of colonization, as noted by scholars from the University of Tennessee, was submission of African economy to the interests of Europe. In particular, this meant that locally produced goods were substituted by goods produced in Europe. That is, the colonists have turned Africa into a source of raw materials and solely a consumer of European goods. Production, that would have ensured a stable national economy, did not evolve but was suppressed. And this caused a gap between technological development of Europe and Africa. 26. The economic objectives of colonization were to maximize economic benefits for the colonists at the lowest possible price. As a result, even those parts of Africa that were economically self-sufficient were subordinate to Europe's foreign economic policy. For the main colonizers, the British, the French, and the Germans, immediate needs of the colonies were not important. In return, total control of production process was established. Europe at that time rapidly evolved and decided to meet its needs at the expense of Africa's natural resources. Quality of production in Africa wasn't improving, and they couldn't engage in marketing themselves. The fate of African economy was totally dependent on European demand. As pointed out by English Academy Fellow, Professor and Researcher Roland Oliver, 1923–2014, the colonists considered development of education in Africa irrelevant and unnecessary, and it was carried out only on a private level. 27. Despite the fact that Europeans witnessed beautifully constructed streets and roads, cultivation of various grains, production of magnificent suits, rule of mighty kings, rich industry and civilization of Africa. After the destructive consequences of slave trade and colonization, it was propagated that Africans had never been civilized. 75. In addition, history books often overlook the fact that during the colonization of Africa and turning its inhabitants into slaves, Africans demonstrated military resistance. This struggle was usually headed by African kings. European authors prefer to call them chiefs to belittle them in comparison to European kings. But many Africans were indeed kings with thousands of years of ancestry. Throughout the 19th century, the Anglo-Ashanti Wars took place between the British Empire and the Ashanti Federation, the territory of present-day Ghana. There were 11 main wars, and the Ashanti people won them all but the last one, that led to turning Ashanti into a British colony. During these wars, Ashanti generals stopped the British invasion and caused respect for power of their kings. They may be called generals because they outranked British generals, who could not conquer them. It took them about 100 years to finally conquer them. Jaja, 1821–1891, the king of Opobo State, the territory of present-day Nigeria, resisted the takeover. He is considered the father of Nigerian nationalism. Muhammad Ahmad, 1844–1885, a ruler of a state on the territory of Sudan, was a thorn in the British flesh. He freed Sudan from the British rule, which allowed the country to remain free for 11 years. Saeed Muhammad Abdullah Hassan, 1856–1920, the founder of a dervish state on the Somalia territory, remained undefeated for a quarter of a century. Bayer Hansen, 1844–1906, the king of Dahomey, the territory of present-day Benin and Togo, seeing that the French were gradually trying to turn Dahomey into their colony, was not afraid to resist them during two Franco-Dahomean wars. Samori Touré, 1830–1900, the founder of the Wassoulou Empire, the territory of present-day Mali, resisted the French colonialism for 18 years. The French called him Black Napoleon from Sudan. Similarly, in South Africa there was a struggle against the rule of Europeans. This shows that for more than a century, African nationalist warriors outranked the best minds of European military and maneuvering, tactics and ability to conduct war. So we've discovered two sides of Europe in times after the Middle Ages. On one hand, we have seen prominent people of African descent who developed the European civilization. And on the other hand, the barbaric way Europeans were treating people in Africa. At the end of the chapter, dear reader, we will assure ourselves that even the centuries-long oppression of blacks failed to destroy their potential or to stop their influence on European and world civilizations. Inventions of black scientists that we use nowadays. In the 18th–20th centuries, blacks invented many things that people use throughout the world. Let's take a look at some of them. Air conditioning unit was invented by Frederick Jones on July 12, 1949. This black scientist, who received more than 40 patents in refrigeration technology, developed an air conditioning unit for military hospitals and a portable refrigerator. Automatic cooling system invented by Frederick is used in large trucks. The first American wood clock with hourly chime was designed by black Benjamin Banneker in 1753. Auto cutoff switch was invented by black Granville Woods on January 1, 1839. Automatic fishing device was invented by black G. Cook on May 30, 1899. Automatic gear shift and direction indicator for vehicles were invented by black Richard Spikes on December 6, 1932, and 1906 respectively. Baby buggy was designed by black William Richardson on June 18, 1899. A folding bicycle frame was invented by black Isaac Johnson on October 10, 1899. Biscuit cutter was invented by black Alexander Ashbourne on November 30, 1875. The world's first blood banks were created by a black scientist, Charles Drew, in 1945. Gamma electrical cell was invented by black Henry Sampson on July 6, 1971. chamber commode was designed by black Thomas Elkins on January 3, 1897. Clothes drying machine was created by black George Sampson on June 6, 1862. Curtain rod was invented by black S. Scranton on November 30, 1889. Curtain rod support was invented by black William Grant on August 4, 1896. Door stop and doorknob were invented by black Osborne Dorsey on December 10, 1878. Dustpan was invented by Lawrence Ray on August 3, 1897. Egg beater, which became the first prototype of a mixer, was invented by black Willis Johnson on February 5, 1884. Electric lamp bulb with carbon filament was invented by black Louis Latimer on March 21, 1882. Elevator with automatic doors was invented by black Alexander Miles on October 11, 1867. A protector was invented by black Powell Johnson on November 2, 1880. Fire escape ladder was designed by black scientist Joseph Winters on May 7, 1878. An improved fire extinguisher and automatic sprinkler system, which has been used in American buildings since 1874, were invented by black Tom Marshall on October 26, 1872. Folding bed and folding chair were invented by black Leonard Bailey on July 18, 1899, and jointly with Brodie and Segura on June 11, 1889, respectively. Fountain pen was invented by black William Purvis on January 7, 1890. Furniture caster was invented by black David Fisher on March 14, 1876. Gas mask was created by black Garrett Morgan in 1912. Electroacoustic microphone was invented by black James West in 1962. His invention, an electret microphone, is currently used in 90% of modern microphones. Golf tee was invented by black George Grant on December 12, 1899. A modern guitar was invented by black Robert Fleming on March 30, 1886. The ESA bus and 1 GHz RISC architecture. Black Mark Dean invented the ESA bus, which allows you to connect different devices to your computer, including printers and modems, and was also involved in invention of a 1 GHz RISC processor chip in 1981. Hairbrush was invented by black Lyda Newman on November 15, 1898. Hand stamp was invented by black William Purvis on February 27, 1883. A modernized horseshoe was invented by black James Ricks on March 30, 1885. Ice cream scooper used to make ice cream balls was invented by black Alfred Krell on February 2, 1897. Multiple effect evaporation system, used in making premium quality sugar by discoloring it. This apparatus is used to this day not only in the sugar producing industry but also in production of glue, milk, soap, and other things. It was invented by black Norbert Rilou on December 10, 1845. Insect destroyer gun was invented by black A. Richard on February 28, 1899. Ironing board was designed by black Sarah Boone on December 30, 1887. Keychain was invented by black Frederick Lowton on January 9, 1894. A modernized lantern was invented by black Michael Harvey on August 19, 1884. Lawn mower with a rotor blade was invented by black John Burr on May 19, 1889. Lawn sprinkler was designed by black J. Smith on May 4, 1897. Lemon squeezer was invented by black John Thomas White on December 8, 1893. A lock, which was an improved version of a Chinese primitive lock from 4,000 years ago and became a prototype of modern door locks, was invented by black Washington Martin on July 21, 1889. Lubricating coupler for engines and mechanisms, which is still used in trains, was invented by black Elijah McCoy on November 15, 1895. Lunchbox was invented by black James Robinson in 1887. Mailbox was invented by black Paul Downing Knott on October 27, 1891. A modern mop was designed by black Thomas Stewart on June 11, 1893. A modernized engine was invented by black Frederick Jones on June 27, 1939. Modern peanut butter was invented by Black George Carver in 1896. Pencil sharpener was designed by Black John Love on November 23, 1897. An improved telephone transmitter and railroad multiplex telegraph were invented by Black Granville Woods in 1884 and 1887 respectively. Record player arm was invented by Black Joseph Dickinson on January 8, 1819. A high-performance refrigerator was invented by Black John Standard on June 14, 1891. An improved riding saddle was invented by Black William Davis on October 6, 1895. A modern rolling pin was invented by Black John Reed in 1864. An improved shampoo headrest was invented by Black Charles Bailiff on October 11, 1898. Spark plug was invented by Black Edmund Berger on February 2, 1839. An improved straightening comb was invented by Black Madam Walker in 1905. Street sweeper. One of the first street sweeper machines was invented by Black Charles Brooks on March 17, 1890. Thermostat control system for generators was invented by Black Frederick Jones on February 23, 1960. Three-color traffic light was designed by Garrett Morgan on November 20, 1923. Tricycle. One of the varieties of such a bicycle was invented by Black Matthew Cherry on May 6, 1886. 3D glasses used to watch movies in 3D were invented by Black Kenneth Dunkley in 1985. Home security system was invented by Black Marie Van Britten Brown in 1968. Shoe lasting machine was invented by Black Jan Matt Zeliger in 1883. The process of using lasers to remove cataracts was developed by Black Patricia Bath in 1981. A spectrograph invented by Black George Carruthers was used by Apollo 16 in 1972 to study UV radiation of the lunar spectrum. Moreover, the spectrograph has made more than 200 photographs of the Earth's atmosphere, magnetic fields, and ionosphere. Air humidifier was invented by Black Rufus Stokes in 1968. An X-ray spectrometer used in space explorations was invented by Black George Alcorn in 1984. Janny coupler that connects train wagons was developed by Black Andrew Beard in 1897. Just imagine for a moment that these benefits of civilization that had been introduced by blacks did not exist in our lives. In fact, many of the things we use have been invented by a whole cast of scientists of African descent, only we haven't heard about it before and never knew their names. In our last chapter we will focus on a specific factor that has in many ways determined today's European civilization, Christianity, and the role of Africans in its formation and development. Fundamental truths. Europeans considered Africans an inferior race. Alessandro de' Medici was the first black head of state in modern history of the West. The achievements of black musician St. George were comparable to Mozart's. Black monk Benedict was highly respected for the deepest, most extensive understanding of theology and the scripture. African Adolf Baden was given several titles, such as Chamberlain, Court Secretary, Ballet Master, and Official State Servant. Black scientist and poet Juan Latino published his collection of poems in a European language. The outstanding French family of Dumas had African roots. African John Blank was one of the most famous British musicians in the early 16th century. African Olaudah Equiano had a decisive influence on the global ban of slave trade. In Russia, Africans served at court. African Ibrahim Hannibal was a general of the Russian army. The city of Kherson on the territory of present-day Ukraine was founded by Ibrahim Hannibal's son. The father of Russian literature, Alexander Pushkin, had African roots. Europeans demonstrated barbarity towards Africans by launching slave trade and colonization. African kings and generals resisted Europeans with dignity. In the 18th-20th centuries, Africans made an overwhelming number of scientific inventions that we still use nowadays. Self-assessment test. 1. What spheres of the modern age Europe were affected by blacks? 1. Social and cultural. 2. Military and political. 3. They did not make a significant impact. 4. Both A and B are correct. 3. 1. What enabled Africans to achieve the highest results in the modern age Europe? 1. White Europeans' luck and benevolence. 2. Ability and hard-working nature. 3. They have not achieved results worthy of attention. 1. What indicates savagery of Europeans in the modern age compared to Africans? 1. Mass destruction of Africans by Europeans for material benefit. 2. Turning Africans into slaves and colonization of their countries. 3. Hospitality of Africans towards traveling Europeans in the context of options A and B. 4. Africans are savages, not Europeans. 4. In what areas did blacks make important scientific inventions? 1. Medicine and health protection. 2. Household appliances and computer engineering. 3. Mechanic engineering and cosmology. 4. At least the first 3 options. 5. None. 1. Results of the test for assessment. Less than 7 points. Unfortunately, you have become a target of an artificial propaganda of European monopoly on scientific and cultural achievements. You have been denied information about the blacks' contribution to the modern age Europe. It will be extremely important for you to get acquainted with the work of anthropologist Runoko Rashidi, Black Star, the African Presence in Early Europe. 4. 7 to 10 points. Not bad. You are familiar with certain personalities of African descent who influence the development of Europe. However, you should conduct a deeper analysis of the impact they made. Practical assignments will help you do this. 11 to 12 points. Great. You are armed with enough evidence of the achievements of blacks and inventions made by Africans. You also dare to compare characteristics of civilization not only in the field of science but also in the system of values and mindset of Europeans and Africans of the considered era. Practical assignments. 1. Conduct a deep analysis of the impact of African descendants in Europe. In particular, families of Thomas Alexander Dumas and Ibrahim Hannibal, and Olaudah Equiano. 2. What distinguishing features did Adolf Baden, Saint Benedict the Moor and Ibrahim Hannibal have? 3. Try to describe the modern world if all the described inventions of Africans were abruptly removed from existence. 4. What additional difficulties did black people have when trying to achieve greatness in the modern age Europe? 5. What were the main reasons for European colonization of Africa? 6. What impact did colonization have on education and economy of African countries?